Now, the secret word for this session is baseline. I thought you'd like that, Paul. And so at the end of Paul's talk, you will have an opportunity to enter that in our game app. Okay, now what a pleasure to bring Paul as our keynote speech for day 2. If you're in the blockchain for business space, you know who Paul is. He is one of the most vocal people about the whole need for open innovation, and he's incredibly committed and passionate about traditional enterprises using public blockchains for confidential transactions. And he's going to talk to us today about that. Now, because he's so visible, he's head of blockchain for Ernst & Young Global. I kept saying, what can I tell the audience new about Paul, right? We all know that he wears crazy shirts, and he didn't disappoint me today. So I said, Paul, give me one little tidbit that's new about you. So Paul shared with me that at one time in his life, he performed live at Lincoln Center in a children's choir. Now, Paul, I know your parents must have a recording of this on some VHS tape, and I hope you release it on LinkedIn for your fans.
I am sure, I'm hopeful that they actually do not have any such recording. They did come and see me, and it was a lot of fun, but I believe that dates from the era when not everything incriminating we did was recorded.
I don't know. Mr. and Mrs. Paul Brody, if you hear this, we want to see it. Well, Paul, thank you so much for the gift of your time today. I'm going to turn the stage over to you. And when you're ready for Q&A, I'll be monitoring that. So just call me back to the stage.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So it's hard to get better introductions than that. And it is really an honor to be here. I put out my presentation. I'm going to share this with everybody right now. I brought out a presentation, and I'm going to share it with everybody. I am just thrilled to be here. I was so excited to be there in March, and of course, that kind of wrapped up right before the pandemic got going. So I was a little disappointed. But the good news is a lot of cool stuff has happened since March. And so this gives me the opportunity to kind of bring you all up to speed and talk about this great shift that was really just kind of ball was just starting to get rolling in March. And now here we are 6 months later, and actually things are moving even faster. I think the key messages haven't changed, but I do have some little updates and maybe some more perspective on what's happened in the meantime. So I'm going to share that with all of you, right? From my own perspective, right, I think it's really important to ask this question: what is it that we want to do in a blockchain? Because the fact is that almost any business process that you talk about can be done without a blockchain, right? And I certainly remember explaining blockchain technology to my mother, who was a mainframe software developer in the 1960s and 70s, and is actually teaching my kids now Python. She's like, well, wait a minute. Like, is that all you guys have accomplished? You made a new transactional system, right? And the answer is, well, yes, but it's one that's fundamentally different from existing systems because it can operate without a centralized intermediary, right? You could have, with a blockchain, transactions and business logic without a centralized authority. And I believe this is really, really important. If you don't mind having an intermediary, then everything you want to do with a blockchain, you can do with traditional server-based infrastructure. There really isn't a point to having a blockchain in that circumstance. But on balance, I actually think that blockchains are extremely useful. And to give you a sense of that, let's think about how intermediaries have tended to operate, because more often than not, they keep turning out to be predators rather than partners, right? There are all these intermediaries out there, all these digital intermediaries out there, and they talk to you about connecting buyers and sellers and coordinating business process. So I thought I would sort of take a minute and translate intermediary speak into plain English. Right? When they say we like to provide analytic services, what they mean is we're planning on selling your data to your competition. When they say we want to use analytics to improve the customer experience, what they mean is we'd like to help your competitors sell to your customers. And when they say they want to create a fair and open market, what they say is we've analyzed your market and we've decided to get into it, right? Okay, that could be interpreted as a little bit cynical, but the fact is that centralized intermediaries absorb enormous power. It's not an accident that over and over again, these centralized intermediaries end up being worth more than the value of all the companies in these business networks, sometimes combined. And it's also not an accident that 30 years into kind of the internet and centralized server era, many companies are still using point-to-point messaging for their business cooperation, or emailing around spreadsheets, or emailing PDFs, because they don't trust these kind of digital intermediaries with their information, right? The private blockchain model that we have seen emerge so far in the world of blockchain doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not a really significant improvement over this, because at the end of the day, if I have to join 5 different proprietary blockchain networks in order to complete a transaction, how is it really different than insisting that I join 5 different proprietary web portals? If I have to join the network of retailer A for their stuff and the network of retailer B for their stuff, and then I need a separate logistics blockchain and an insurance blockchain, it doesn't seem to me like we've really made a significant advance, right? In fact, it's very reminiscent of the old era. And the instinct of a lot of companies is to control everything, right? And the result of this is kind of funny if it wasn't such a huge waste of money, right? But it turns out that the average private blockchain has 0.5 participants other than the founding entity. Now, why is that? That's because for every company that's willing to join, say, a consortium to just be a member, or was willing to be a participant in somebody else's network, there are 2 companies that started their own. That math doesn't make sense, right? If everybody throws a party, no one is available to be a guest, right? And this data is based on a survey of over 200 companies that have joined up or participated in or started their own blockchains. So we know the private blockchain model doesn't scale. It isn't very appealing, although it is very expensive, right? People often talk about public blockchains as they sort of use what it's called in the technology business, they call FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And my personal favorite is the whole, like, blockchains, public blockchains are for criminals, right? But the reality is very different from that, right? In fact, we looked at some of the data last year, right? It turns out that, the vast majority of exchanges have implemented some level of know your customer, right? Or some of them have, right? And that apparently covers the vast majority of trading volume. So in the course of just a few years, we've gone from blockchains don't exist to they exist. They have some level of regulatory framework, and the majority of the business transactions in these networks are now covered by some level of KYC and AML, right? This data is from last year. That's only going to get higher and higher, right? So the image of blockchain as this like place for criminals, it's very familiar to the one we used to deal with the internet. Like, oh, that's kind of uncontrolled territory. Yes, that's true. Some parts of the blockchain, some parts of the internet are a little out of control. That doesn't mean that it can't be used by enterprises for legitimate business purposes, right? The other thing that you'll hear a lot of people talk about is this thing that they call the finality problem, right? Typically, blockchains take, if you could take the Ethereum case, 15 to 30 seconds to complete a block. And they talk about like, well, how finished is it finished? And, when a block is done, how much longer do I have to wait for it to feel really absolutely certain? The answer is 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 4 hours. For vast majority of enterprise transactions, this is kind of an irrelevant question, right? When 2 companies transact with each other, they're usually dealing with each other in this concept of net 30, right? And they're talking about days, not milliseconds, right? Whatever the transaction finality is on a blockchain, whether it's 15 seconds or 30 seconds or 5 hours, it's largely irrelevant for most business transaction needs. The final thing that we hear a lot about is people saying, oh, public blockchains can't scale, right? In fact, I would argue they are scaling remarkably well, right? If you took typical credit card transactions, they have about 50 million merchants, 150 different currencies, and about 15,000 financial institutions. The Ethereum mainnet has in excess, I did this data last year, almost around 50 million user addresses, 227,000 different smart contracts, which can be currencies, they can be business agreements, they can be DeFi networks, and over 10,000 different network nodes. Now, are these exactly comparable? Absolutely not. Do typical credit card transaction networks handle far more transactions every day? Absolutely. But let's keep in mind, these networks have been around for 50, 60 years, right? Ethereum is now about 10 years old. So I would say it's off to a fantastic start. And a lot of the technology that's out there is already being deployed to scale things up. One of the things that's not widely appreciated is that the same technology that we use to enable privacy, the concept of batching together zero knowledge proofs, also turns out to be key to enabling scalability, right? So one of the things that we found last year was that we could improve the cost of privacy, drive down that cost by batching 20 transactions into a single mathematical proof, right? So that got us down to somewhere between 5 and 20 cents. We've got a mathematical roadmap to get to something on the order of 2,000 to 3,000 transactions in the batch. So by that by itself would allow us to increase the capacity of a lot of these networks by a factor of 10 over the next few years. So my point is, there's lots of room in this technology to grow, and it's not going to happen overnight. I think fears of technology not being capable enough, not scalable enough, kind of too much of a Wild West, these are distractions from the fact that public blockchains are accessible to all participants. And I think this is a really good time to kind of try to remember our history, because one of my favorite sayings is, those who don't learn their history are condemned to repeat it. And so it's worth remembering that the internet itself is a public permissionless network, and that almost all the things that are said about blockchains today, public blockchains, nearly identical things were said about the internet 20 years ago. I can literally remember reading articles saying that streaming audio, never mind streaming video, streaming audio was going to break the internet. Streaming audio did not break the internet. DeFi will not break Ethereum, right? These technologies, they get tested, they get pushed to their limits, right? And engineers solve those problems to drive scalability and results. So for most companies that have already implemented blockchains, they have learned an important lesson. And this is what gives me a lot of optimism about the future. If you ask the same companies who have implemented private blockchains, where do they see the future, right? The vast majority of them, 75%, say somewhat likely or very likely their future is on a public blockchain. So the other thing we know, not only do we know that private blockchains don't work very well, but we know that I think people are taking the right lesson away from this, which is that if I try to invite somebody into a proprietary and private network, it's going to be very difficult in order to make that public network, get that network to scale, right? But on a public network, everybody can join in and participate. The problem with public networks, especially early on, is they didn't come with any privacy, right? Now, if you're a large company, right, and you've got hundreds of suppliers and dozens of competitors out there, and you are putting on a public network transactions that are not private, that tell everybody, this is what I'm buying, this is how much I'm paying for it, this is how many I'm getting, and this is where it's going, that's sensitive commercial enterprise data, and you cannot let your competition see that, right? So public blockchains may be a great idea, but if you don't have privacy, then it doesn't work. I think the good news is that there are a lot of solutions to the big problems around public blockchains, right? And what we have been working on over the last 18 months is systematically knocking down some of these challenges and then packaging together the proposed solution. And I'll just give you a sense of what we see as the big priority challenges to make public blockchain scalable and usable. Number one, private business logic. It's not enough that I can transfer assets between one company and another privately. It's also absolutely essential that we be able to have shared business logic, right? A really good example of this is a purchase order or volume discount, right? I'm buying something from you, right? I'm buying it over and over again because I'm making stuff, and we have a deal, right? If I buy more than 1,000, the price goes down. That's private business logic, right? Business identity, right? There was an old joke in the early days of the internet. No one knows on the internet that you're a dog, right? And that usually came with a picture of a cartoon dog surfing the internet. Well, the truth is, we really would like to know with whom we are doing business. You know, we don't want a situation where somebody says, hey, I'm Ernst & Young, do you want to buy from me? And it turns out they are not EY, right? So business identity and discovery, distributed directories of verified enterprise users is very important. Process and state synchronization and messaging. So one of the key principles that we see between companies is it's not enough just for us to have a contract and to move money back and forth. We need to be able to talk to each other. Hey, you shipped me 1,000 units of something and 200 of them fell off the truck, or half of them failed QA. We need to be able to talk about with our secure business partners the issues inside of our business and synchronize our data. And then finally, we need to properly tokenize the assets that are transferring back and forth, right? One of the key value propositions of blockchain technology is that we are taking assets, elements of our product, value, items of value, and we are turning them into the equivalent of digital Legos, right? And it's not just that we are trying to create this digital messaging system between companies. We want to create these digital Legos so that people can in turn build new things with these digital Legos, right? So if you're familiar with DeFi, decentralized finance, it's all about taking this digital Lego, a dollar token, a euro token, a Bitcoin token, and providing services on top of that. And it's essential that whether it's a purchase order or an asset transfer or a payment or a commitment to make a payment, that those digital tokens can be used by companies to do things like borrow money for working capital, or exchange a commitment to be paid in 30 days for actual cash now, right, at a slight discount. These types of tokenizations are essential for enterprises because they're the same things that enterprises do in the real world, and moving them onto a blockchain will make them faster, cheaper, simpler, and infinitely more scalable. How much more scalable? The answer, it turns out, is way more than you might believe. And I want to share with you a really good example that we have from some of the work that we did at Microsoft. So one of the early projects that we did at Microsoft was create a network solution on a blockchain to support the Xbox video game network. Now, Microsoft they're one of the biggest players in the video game business, and they have more than 3,000 different contracts with different video game suppliers. And many of these contracts are very different. The kind of terms that you get if you're Electronic Arts and you're one of the world's biggest technology companies is different than the kind of terms you get as a small mom and pop a video game developer for educational software. So lots of different terms and different contracts between different parties. And it was taking Microsoft, on average, 45 days after the end of each month in order to generate the transactional data statements and then turn that transactional data into the specific amounts that they owed each business partner, right? So in other words, if you're Electronic Arts, maybe the first 10,000 units, you get 70% of your revenue and then 80% after that. Whereas if you're a mom and pop shop, maybe you just permanently always get 70% or 75% or something like that. So the rules are different, and applying those rules systematically and scalably across 3,000 different contracts didn't scale very well. On a blockchain, they scale beautifully, scale tremendously. So we took cycle time from Microsoft from 45 days down to under 5 minutes, right? Secondly, we took the cost of managing this process. We are taking that cost. It's not done fully deployed yet, but when it's done, we estimate that it will be roughly half the current price tag. And then finally, we have increased enormously the level of trust between the participants, because everybody now can see within a few minutes of it actually happening how each individual transaction in their business agreement was processed by the business logic and turned into a payment, right? So we tend to capture mistakes or changes or issues much sooner than we would have in the old system. And if you capture those things sooner, if you make them more visible quickly, you can fix them much faster. So blockchain technology can have a huge, huge impact on enterprise return on investment. And what we did was we took all of these key requirements and we worked to integrate them into a single set of infrastructure. And that infrastructure is called the baseline protocol. And the idea behind it is that we can allow enterprises to do secure, multi-company business transactions with privacy and asset transfers and business logic with each other on a public blockchain. And very, very importantly, never ever put any sensitive business data on the blockchain, right? It sounds very simple in theory, and it's intended to sound simple, but in fact, the original founding members, EY, Microsoft, and Consensus, it took us, sort of probably EY, 2 years of background research in the advanced mathematics, and then another 9 months of collaboration with Microsoft and Consensus to wrap these things together in the first version of the baseline protocol. That's all now been made public domain and open source, and it's been handed over to the Oasis Foundation for separate stewardship. So we've truly donated this research into the public domain so that it's adoptable and usable by other companies without anybody thinking to themselves, is EY going to come after me in some future date for, licensing fees or anything else? No, we're not, right? We've taken away our ownership of this. We've donated it. We've given up control of this process. And we've done that in order to make adoption attractive, appealing, and without fear for other companies, right? Now, along the way, our methodology around developing the baseline protocol was actually to take a single business process and apply those principles, private business logic, no enterprise data on chain, et cetera, into that process and show how it should work. And the process that we picked was procurement. Why did we pick procurement? We picked procurement for a couple of reasons. Number one, this, in fact, is the main way that companies transact with each other, at least non-financial companies. Everything you buy, right? This cup of coffee, the coffee that came in it, the lights that are on my table here that are sort of giving me a spooky glow. All of this stuff is made by one company from stuff they bought from another company that was bought from somebody else. And they all added some value along the way. But really, the main way that enterprises interact with each other is they buy stuff from each other. And when it's 3 PM, you need extra coffee for that. Now, first of all, it turns out this is the most basic process. It's a really big process, right? It's typical at large companies that somewhere between 60 and 80% of all their revenue comes in the door and goes straight out the door as procurement spend, right? And it turns out that this process, in addition to being big and valuable, is also really broken. And it's really broken because what happens is this process that sounds really simple is actually gets very complicated, right? What happens is, people basically say, I've got money, you've got stuff, and we're going to agree to exchange them. But we're going to have some rules in this agreement, right? The more I buy, the less I pay. When I cross certain threshold, I'm going to get a discount, right? When I cross other thresholds in terms of dollars, I'm going to get a rebate, right? Maybe the price of what I'm buying is linked to the price of oil or the price of electricity because it's made with lots of oil or lots of electricity, right? So the business logic in these agreements gets complicated, and companies are really, really good at coming up with ways to manage to design these agreements, right? They can sit in the negotiating room, or they can do the Zoom, right? And say, I'll do this for you if you do that for me. They have no idea if they can actually implement it. And it turns out more often than not that large companies really struggle to implement the agreements that they've signed up for, right? And what's made it exceptionally complicated to implement these agreements is the shift of companies towards being these much more decentralized organizations, right? If you have one of these phones at home, right, the name on the company on the phone isn't the company that actually built the phone. These phones are actually built by other companies that are acting on the parent company's behalf or the orchestrator's behalf. Now, if a big company negotiates a volume purchase discount and they have 5, 10, 15 suppliers who are authorized to buy off that volume purchase discount, how do you know where you are in that volume discount? The answer, it turns out, is that it's really hard to tell, right? But if we take all of this process and we put it on a blockchain and put it into a smart contract and allow all the participants who are authorized to do so to buy off of that contract, we can turn this very, very complicated process into something that's actually relatively straightforward to manage and relatively straightforward to understand, right? And so that's exactly what we did. We said, okay, I want to enable a world where parent companies can negotiate agreements on behalf of their own subsidiaries and their business partners, and that those agreements will keep track of volume purchased, aggregated spend, correct pricing, and we will make sure, using smart contracts, that everybody is always complying with that agreement. And it turns out the payoff for this can be really enormous, right? Now, when you do this on a public blockchain, you make it even better because you're using open standards and public blockchains, which means anybody can join a network, There's no permissions. There's nothing special required. There's literally hundreds of companies, choice of providers, that can bring you onto the Ethereum blockchain, or you could just download the software yourself. There are no intermediaries. There's no, if you get EY to help you use a public blockchain, we can never be like, wow, looks like this is going great for you. We're going to raise our price. And you have to say, well, I don't know if I want that, right? The answer is, if you don't like what we're offering, you can always walk away. We have no power or control in the public network, right? Public blockchains are vastly cheaper than private blockchains, and they have much, much higher security, because public blockchains have tens of thousands of nodes. They have thousands of developers. Yes, there are security problems in them, but those problems are tackled, they're reported, they're managed, they're tracked in a way that is simply not done in private networks. Just because you don't see press releases about private networks being hacked or not being hacked doesn't mean it's not happening. So if we're all going to use public blockchains, what should we be using them for, right? I would argue that the main value proposition for public blockchains is that we should be using them to integrate enterprises more than anything else. Now, I believe that what's happened over the last 30 or 40 years in the enterprise is that they have become incredibly digital internally, right? ERP systems, analytics, business process controls, machine learning tools, almost all of these are deployed inside the four walls of the enterprise. And when you get to the edge of your enterprise, almost all of that sophistication comes to an end, and we're back to EDI messages and mailing out spreadsheets. With blockchains, we can have cooperation between enterprises. We can have shared facts, similar to having a shared database. We can have shared process. We can have shared agreements, and we can do it without having to give up any strategic control to a third party, right? So that is really our vision. And I personally believe that although I care very much about the arguments in favor of creating a more open financial system, and I believe in their value, I actually really think that for the most part, it's not blockchains that are going to enable that. It's changes in regulatory compliance and other rules that make it easier for people to sign up for bank accounts. But blockchain itself isn't necessarily the key to doing that. Blockchain is also relatively complex. If you're not empowered to be banked, if you don't have a relatively sophisticated education, I think for many people, blockchains may be too complicated as a way of directly controlling a solution. But I think they have immense power as a behind the scenes tool to create new services, new tools, new products that are simple, accessible, and low cost for consumers. But I think fundamentally, we don't care what database our bank runs on. And I think in the future, there may be many more solutions available to consumers. Blockchains will be the glue that connects the companies that serve these consumers, but the consumers themselves will not know or care which blockchain or what technology underpins that solution. So our belief, my belief especially, is that blockchains are ultimately a B2B technology, and they are primarily going to be all about integrating enterprises and business ecosystems together. So where are we, right, in this process? At EY, we have spent, I would say, much of the last 4 years. Our blockchain group is now entering its 5th year. We spent much of the last 4 years really focusing on building out the core technology of privacy, right? And in the last year, we've come together with Consensus and Microsoft to launch the baseline protocol. So we've been kind of building this piece by piece along the way. And during this time period, we've been mostly building private blockchains on the Ethereum technology stack, but not on the public Ethereum network, on the grounds that eventually we'll be able to migrate, or at the very least integrate, most of our customers with that public blockchain environment. What's exciting now is that we're starting to see the rest of the world catch on to our vision and join this movement. One of the best headlines I've read this year was waking up to see that Coca-Cola had chosen the baseline technology to integrate their North America bottling system. We had nothing to do with that. And you're not involved in any way, right? And they're like, why is he proud of that? I'm proud of that because we helped start the baseline protocol, and it's taken on a life of its own without us. And I've got 2 kids, and I want to see them take on a life of their own without me. I think baseline is a little bit my baby, but to see it succeed and to see other people adopt it and for it to move forward without us is incredibly powerful. Same thing for the headline last week that Accenture is joining the Baseline Protocol organization that we saw on Twitter. That's incredibly exciting. We've got Chainlink there as well, the Ethereum Foundation, the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, Unibright, Provide Services, other companies, right? This is becoming a large-scale business community that are starting to really ramp up the build out of this technology. And that makes me incredibly proud of where we are going. In terms of where is EY going, I often get the question, so that's great, you guys just donated all this really cool technology. How is EY, what's EY in this business for? And the answer is we are in this business to make money for sure, right? We don't see this as some kind of a charity activity, right? Fundamentally, we have two businesses, right? And I just believe that it is possible to build profitable and successful businesses on open source technology, because at the end of the day, I don't actually think that most of our enterprise clients really care if they're using proprietary private technology or completely open technology. They don't care where the intellectual property lies. I mean, provided they're not obviously violating any rules about IP ownership or IP usage. What they care about is, will somebody build a reliable and useful solution that can scale up, right? And 20 years ago, it was hard to swallow this idea of kind of an open source software run business. Today, I think it's very common and people are much more comfortable with that. We fundamentally have two businesses at EY. Number one, doing things for our clients on public and private blockchains. And for that, we have built an application platform called EY OpsChain. So OpsChain is about the ability to create, deploy tokens, smart contracts, business directories, and build business process tools on public networks. And so that's the first half of what we're doing. It's in the top box on the screen. And in fact, our first really big product in this space that we've launched that's publicly accessible is network procurement. OpsChain network procurement does exactly what I talked about, the initial use case for Baseline Protocol. It allows companies to buy product with rules at scale on public networks. We've also got a couple of other products that are in development now that will be available. One is for product traceability, something that we've done for 50 or 60 companies outside of a managed services environment. We're now migrating it into a public blockchain, privacy-enabled managed services framework. And we've got global trade origin for tracking where products come from and are going. And we have our public finance manager, which is all about helping governments and government agencies and multinational agencies track public finances, grants, and make sure that taxpayers and donors are getting the value from what they invested in. And I'm particularly excited about that one because I really believe in kind of the mission of low corruption, high value public service. The second big part of our business is blockchain analyzer. And so if one part of our business is about helping companies do things on the blockchain, the other part is about understanding what's happened in the blockchain environment. The core of that is our audit and assurance business. We audit, I think, well over 130 companies. That was, I think the last time we actually did a full count was a couple of years ago, but we audit lots and lots of blockchain companies. I suspect, I'm not sure, we do more of that than anybody else does. And we're the first people to really invest heavily in audit tools and technologies. In addition to that, we've launched our very first security product, which is smart contract review. The idea is, let's start to think about the future, right? When we're buying and selling digital tokens and entering into complex multi-party business contracts, right? The average person in an enterprise cannot read software code. And should we be expecting them to understand the code underneath the deck? Absolutely not, right? If they go underneath the hood and they look at a smart contract, we need to tell them there's no malware in here, that this contract applies to the best of our knowledge to publicly available standards, right? That this is what certain terms mean in the contract, and this is how they play out in the software. That's what our smart contract testing service does. And then we've got a tax calculator, which we'll be showing integrated into our system next year. And we also just launched our first Bitcoin Explorer, right? And the Bitcoin Explorer is there. We'll add Ethereum very soon. But the idea is that you should be able to see your money in the supply chain, your product in the supply chain, your assets as they move around the network, and you should be able to see and visualize how these all work. So we're bringing all of these things together under blockchain.ey.com. If you would like to actually try them out, we are doing something quite unusual for a giant audit firm that focuses on B2B. These services, our Bitcoin Explorer, our smart contract testing service, and our network procurement prototype are actually all available for the members of the general public to use free of charge. So you can just go there, you can check it out. I think particularly if you're a developer, you'll find a smart contract testing tool very useful. If you're a Bitcoin buyer or seller, you can use Explorer. You can see where your money came from. You can actually find your own wallet and look at that situation as well. So that's what we are doing. And of course, we will sell these as managed services to enterprises. And of course, we will provide all of the consulting, implementation, and transformation work around these services. So that's a little bit about what our strategy is. And with that, I come to the end of my presentation. And with time, I hope for a little bit of Q&A managed by Mary. The QR code on the screen is my contact information. If you want to talk to me, or you can tweet at me. I'm at pbrody on Twitter. And I think I also generally have about a roughly weekly column in CoinDesk sharing my latest musings, which are sometimes good and sometimes not so great. Mary, thank you.
Paul, that was fantastic. You're my cup of coffee. Every time I hear you talk, I get excited. So thank you so much. And I also want to, again, thank EY for being a partner here at the Blockchain Center of Excellence. Okay, we've got a lot coming in. So let's unpack a few things. First of all, this is a Blockchain for Business conference. And I think one of the most powerful ways to convince business people of the value is the things that you talked about with Xbox, right? That's what they want to know. What is the business value? And I wrote down, in that example, they went from settlements of 45 days to 5 minutes. The costs went in half. You're able to capture mistakes sooner. Those kind of examples is what the world needs to see. So I'm also just, as you are well aware, you've got a lot of other examples, and I'm really excited because I'm working on the ANSA check case study with your colleagues in Italy. And for those in the audience who don't know about this, EY and ANSA is the largest Italian news media. They were really struggling with imposter news. Right? So other people that were claiming that this was an ANSA story and it wasn't. And EY helped with the technical implementation, and it's on public Ethereum. You also answered another great question, because the one question I keep hearing from business people is, how much are the transaction costs? And you've been able to pull, by batching. I thought that was a fantastic interim strategy. Get down to like 5 cents a transaction. That's been great. So other than Xbox and ANSA, are you able to talk about any other things that you're working on where traditional businesses are picking a public blockchain solution?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that the most common implementation right now on public blockchains is product traceability, right? So if you want to prove where your product came from, how it's performing, where it's located, what its history was, that's by far the most common activity. And we've probably got about 50 clients, Carrefour, Spinoza, the Buffalo Mozzarella Company, a bunch of wineries. There's lots and lots and lots of sort of public blockchain accountability and traceability going on. What we're excited about is the next wave of this, which is designed to do a couple of things. Historically, a lot of the traceability has been sort of timestamps and document stamps. What we're headed to now is tokenization and transfers with privacy. So a lot of companies want to prove the carbon footprint, for example, or they want to prove the product history of the product where necessary, but they don't want to disclose the specifics of their suppliers to the general public or to their competitors. So the next wave of product traceability is going to be with tokenization and privacy, and that's starting to ramp up. And then the other thing where we're seeing public blockchains being used enormously is this emerging space of decentralized financial services. So people are implementing loans and borrowing and transactional services, and that's really exploded on public blockchains. An amazing data point is, 2 years ago, there was less than $500 million in these digital financial contracts. 4 months ago, we were close to about 4 billion. we are now in excess of 10 billion. So that's a kind of an incredible ramp. And for me, the big transition there is right now, that's all individual users, that's all consumers, very sophisticated consumers buying, for the most part, buying their own digital financial products. I look forward to seeing enterprises adopt this technology for their financial transactions once it's available with privacy.
Okay, awesome. All right, we have a couple questions here. How do you mitigate the risk of price fluctuation on public blockchains like Ethereum?
So the way we mitigate the risk is we have a technical roadmap for increasing batching or scalability. So if we see the price of gas go up for a sustained amount for a sustained period of time, we will take the time to implement like a larger batch size. We've tried to, we have a limited number of people in our R&D team, and we're always kind of faced off with this challenge. Like I could spend more time driving the cost down lower, or I could spend more time trying to figure out how to do a better job on kind of complex business logic. So we kind of got to about 25 cents and said, okay, that's good for the moment. We're going to focus over here. If the price goes back further up, we'll see it. I mean, this is a very typical thing. Like when you hit constraints, people tend to go back and sort of implement more of the stuff that they said, oh, I'll get to that later. Well, sometimes later arrives and you just got to implement it.
Okay, good. So I know you're talking in general about public networks, and I know EY does a lot on Ethereum. Are there other public networks that you're helping clients build solutions on?
Right now, not so much. And that's not because I'm sort of anti other networks. One of the big challenges in building a software company is how do you make sure that you do a good job at what you're doing? And what we decided early on was that for the audit side of our business, when it comes to analytics and understanding blockchains, we will support pretty much any blockchain, public or private. And we support Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, Hyperledger, R3, all of these over on the audit side of the business. But for developing software, we made a key decision early on that we would simply develop on the single most popular platform, and we would be the best at that, and we would not divide our attention. So I always hate getting in to this battle of like which blockchain is better or which blockchains do we use. We use the one that's the most widely used. It's not necessarily the most perfect, but it allows us to really concentrate our efforts and be very, very good at that.
Excellent, excellent. And Paul, we have time for one more question. So we do, in addition to business professionals, we also have information systems professionals. And so one of the questions are how is EY preparing for the Ethereum 2.0? Right. So they're having, for those of you out there in business world, the underlying architecture is changing. The consensus mechanism is changing. How is EY preparing for that?
So our research team is looking at Ethereum 2.0. We're always staying up on top of this. For the most part, we think there won't be a lot of changes. What is interesting to think about is Ethereum 2.0 will eventually have a couple of important changes. Number one, it's going to be much more sort of carbon footprint friendly because we're going to switch from proof of work to proof of stake. And I think that's very important. We got a number of clients have just said, listen, we can't join something that generates this level of carbon output. So I'm very happy with that. And then the second thing that's quite challenging and we'll have to think through carefully is the next version of Ethereum will have a scalability technology called Sharding, and it will allow the network to fragment. And the result is it will take a longer period of time for transactions to be cross-matched and integrated to have that sort of single final record. And so it'll involve some careful thinking about how you time and manage transactions or smart contracts that might exist in more than one kind of shard of the network. So that's very, very exciting. And then the other thing that we're thinking about both for 1.0 and 2.0 that's really worth remembering is interaction that's likely to exist in mainland China. Right, the Chinese government is now launching the world's largest and the first really kind of big digital currency. Ethereum is not widely used in China, but it's essential for the external links. And so we're starting to think about how that's going to be integrated. We're talking to companies in China about how they're interacting with that system as well. So those are some of the things that are on our Ethereum 2.0 agenda.
Okay, well, we are out of time, Paul. The limitation of a virtual conference is you can't hear virtually everybody just saying thank you to you, but thank you for you personally and to EY. And to our audience, now is the time where you can go to the Brella app, and now you understand why I picked baseline as our secret word. And we'll be back in a few minutes with the next event. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks for having me.